In the sun-scorched town of Redstone, New Mexico, where hope cost more than a man's life, a girl was sold like a horse for $3. But when one man saw the pendant hanging around her neck, he remembered a vow sworn over a grave, and the devil himself couldn't stop what came next. The midday heat rose off the parched earth like a fever dream. Dust coated the boots, faces, and weary souls of Redstone's townsfolk as they gathered around a rickety platform outside the feed store. The auction block was just a few splintered boards nailed together, but today it was the heart of the town. The girl stood atop it, barefoot, silent. She was young, maybe 16, 17 at most. Her hair, tangled as barbed wire, was streaked with red desert dust. Her faded cotton dress, torn at the hem, hung like a ghost's shroud. Her wrists were tied with a fraying cord, more for show than necessity. She hadn't tried to run. Not once. She hadn't even flinched when the deputy hauled her into town the night before, her sleeves stained with blood, her hair dusted with ash. The deputy claimed she'd been found wandering near Coyote Pass, alone, dazed, and mute. No papers, no kin, no name to claim her. Only the pendant. It dangled from a thin leather cord around her neck, a small, hand-forged piece of copper and iron, shaped like a star with a single twisted point. It caught the sunlight like it was calling for rescue. "All right, folks," the auctioneer barked, climbing onto the platform. "Let's make this quick. What you see is what you get. Strong, quiet, young enough to train, old enough to work. Bidding starts at $3. The crowd chuckled darkly. A few muttered to each other. Some men leered. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat whispered a prayer and looked away. $3, a voice called from the back. The gavel cracked down like a judge's sentence. Sold. Elliot Kane had just stepped out of the livery stable when the gavel's echo hit him. He'd come to Redstone to buy nails and a new bridle, not to get tangled in trouble. He'd sworn off trouble years ago. But something about that sound stopped him dead. He turned and saw her on the platform, standing still as a statue, the sun glinting off that star-shaped pendant. His chest tightened like a cinched saddle. That pendant wasn't store-bought. It wasn't like the trinkets peddled at church fairs. It was handmade. Elliot had crafted one just like it 18 years back for his sister, Mara. He'd watched her shape the copper over a fire, her hands trembling the day her newborn daughter vanished, stolen from the cradle while her husband was gone. The fire that gutted the Kane homestead took more than wood. It burned through family, memory, and blood. They'd said the baby died in the blaze, but Elliot never believed it. Seeing that pendant now, its exact design down to the twist in the iron, was like staring into the flames all over again. The girl was led off the platform by a man with a cruel grin and a stained hat. Vance Cutler, a trader in flesh, cards, and misery. Elliot had crossed paths with men like him before, in the war and on the open trail. Every time he thought he'd left that life behind, men like Cutler dragged him back. Elliot didn't move yet. He watched, waited, his hand brushing the worn leather of a holster he hadn't touched in months. "You here to gawk or buy, Kane?" the stable hand asked, spitting tobacco into the dust. Elliot didn't answer. He just stared at the girl's face, at the way she moved, like she'd been taught to swallow pain whole. At the way the pendant gleamed, a signal from a past he couldn't let go. He remembered the promise. "If she's out there," Mara had whispered on her deathbed, "if there's even a chance you find her, you bring her home." Elliot stepped off the stable porch and walked toward the shadow of hell itself. Night fell over Redstone like a heavy quilt, thick and stifling. The town never truly slept, wind hissed through broken fences, and the saloon's faint piano notes carried like a drunk's promise. But outside Vance Cutler's shack, the silence was louder than a gunshot. Elliot Kane sat astride his horse just beyond the sagging fence, watching the dim glow of a lantern inside. The girl hadn't cried, hadn't spoken, hadn't fought when they led her into the shack. She just clutched that star-shaped pendant like it was the only thing tethering her to the world. Elliot had seen that look before, in soldiers who came back from battle with their bodies whole but their souls shattered. In himself, staring into a cracked mirror after too many nights with a bottle. He dismounted, boots silent on the hard-packed dirt, his revolver still holstered. Vance was a loud drunk, and loud drunks made mistakes. Elliot needed stealth, the kind that came from knowing mercy wasn't the same as justice. He crept to the shack's back window, where the lantern's flicker showed her curled on a thin pallet in the corner, knees drawn up, hands wrapped around the pendant. It gleamed faintly, even in the weak light, like it carried a spark of something sacred. Elliot remembered crafting it with Mara, the way she'd hummed a soft tune while shaping the copper, her voice steady despite the grief of her missing child. That star was no mere trinket, it was a mother's desperate hope, forged for a daughter she might never see again. His breath caught when he noticed a faint scar behind the girl's right ear, shaped like a crescent moon. Mara's baby had one just like it, a birthmark the midwife called a kiss from the stars. Elliot's pulse thundered. This wasn't just any girl. She was blood. He stepped back, heart pounding like a stampede. The saloon wasn't far, and Vance would be there, boasting as always. Elliot mounted up and rode into town, the night air sharp against his face. Redstone's only drinking hole glowed like a fever, its doors creaking as he stepped inside. Smoke curled thick as regret, and the air stank of whiskey and sweat. Laughter clattered from the corners, hollow and mean. Vance sat at a table under a swaying lamp, his hat tipped back, a cigar stub smoldering between his fingers. Cards lay scattered like fallen soldiers, and his cronies, men who smelled of dust and bad choices, leaned in, grinning. $3 damn. Vance crowed, slamming his glass down. Paid more for a lame horse. This one's quiet though. Eyes like a frozen lake, not a peep out of her. Like she's already half dead. Elliot froze mid-step, his jaw tight. Vance didn't know her, didn't know the fire in her veins or the family she came from. He only saw a girl he thought no one would claim. Elliot moved to the bar where the barkeep, a grizzled man who'd seen too many fights end in blood, watched him warily. Elliot laid 3 silver coins on the counter, their clink cutting through the saloon's din. Then he pulled a fourth, a gold piece worn smooth, and held it up. He walked to Vance's table, the room quieting with each step. Conversations died, the piano faltered. He dropped the coins in front of Vance, the sound sharp as a whip crack. $4, Elliot said, voice low and steady. And I don't kill you. The saloon held its breath. No laughter, no music. Just the kind of silence that comes before a storm. The saloon's silence was a living thing, heavy and sharp, as Elliot Kane stood over Vance Cutler's table. Vance's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing as he leaned back in his chair, sizing up the man before him. You threatening me, Kane, over some nobody girl? He growled, his hand twitching toward the knife at his belt. I'm buying what you had no right to touch, Elliot said, his voice like gravel under a boot. I'm paying more than you did. That's fair. Vance's cronies shifted, hands hovering near their guns, but the room stayed frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody wanted to be the first to bleed. Vance laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You always were a preacher with a gun, Kane. Even after the war, after your sister's ranch went up in smoke. Didn't learn a damn thing, did you? Elliot's eyes locked on him, unyielding. She had a daughter. Disappeared in that fire. Wasn't supposed to make it. Vance scoffed, spitting into the sawdust. You think that girl's your ghost? I bought her fair and square. I know the pendant, Elliot said. I made it. So did her mother. That shut Vance up just for a moment. His bravado flickered, like a candle caught in a draft. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he didn't like them either. She's mine, he snapped, standing now, shoulders squared. Bought and paid for. Then I'm buying her back, Elliot said. With interest. Vance lunged, his knife flashing in the lamplight. But Elliot was faster. His own blade came up, not to kill but to wound, pinning Vance's hand to the table with a sickening thud. Vance screamed, the whiskey bottle crashing to the floor, blood pooling on the green felt. The crowd gasped but stayed rooted. Elliot leaned in, his voice a low hiss. You don't own her. And if you touch her again, I'll bury you where nobody'll ask questions. Vance's face twisted with pain and rage, but he was pinned, helpless. Take her, he spat, clutching his bleeding hand as Elliot yanked the knife free. Take your cursed kid and get out. Elliot didn't answer. He turned and walked out, the saloon's eyes burning into his back. Nobody followed. They'd seen a man with a reason, not just a weapon, and that was enough to keep them still. Outside, the girl stood in the dark, clutching her star-shaped pendant like it might vanish if she let go. She didn't speak as Elliot approached, just watched him with eyes that held no trust, only questions. He handed her a blanket and nodded to a spare horse tied behind his own. "You're coming with me," he said. "If you want to." She studied him, her gaze sharp despite the exhaustion in her frame. Then, slowly, she nodded. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She climbed onto the horse with the steady grace of someone who'd learned to move without making noise. They rode out of Redstone before the town's roosters could stir, the hoofbeats blending with the desert wind. With each step, Elliot thought of the fire that took his sister's ranch, the ashes left behind, the promise he'd made. The girl beside him was alive, and that meant the fight wasn't over. The desert night wrapped around them like a shroud as Elliot Kane and the girl rode away from Redstone. The stars burned bright above, sharp as knife points, and the distant howl of coyotes carried a mournful tune. They camped a mile out, tucked against a low mesa where the wind couldn't claw at them. A small fire crackled, its glow softening the hard lines of the girl's face as she sat, knees drawn up, fingers tracing the edges of her star-shaped pendant. Elliot laid out his bedroll across the fire, keeping his distance, not out of fear but to give her space to breathe. She hadn't spoken since they left, but her silence wasn't empty. It was the kind that listened, that weighed every sound and shadow. He didn't ask her name. Not yet. He knew she might not have one to give, not after what she'd been through. After a long stretch, when the coyotes fell quiet and the moon hung low like a chipped silver dollar, Elliot spoke. "You remember anything?" She didn't look up, just blinked once, slow. He took it as a no. He nodded, staring into the flames. "Didn't think so." The silence settled again, softer now, like dust after a storm. "I had a sister," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Mara. Used to hum when she was scared, even when the world was falling apart. Had a baby girl, born right before I left for the war. Came back to find nothing but ashes. Sheriff said the kid died in the fire. I never believed him." Her brow twitched, just a flicker, but she stayed quiet. He went on. "I looked for years. Every town, every whisper. Nothing." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in worn leather. Unfolding it carefully, he revealed another pendant, identical to hers, copper and iron, shaped like a star with a twisted point, blackened by time. "Only two ever made," he said. "This one, and the one you're wearing." She looked up then, her eyes dark and reflective as a desert spring. Slowly, she touched her pendant, as if to confirm it was real. Then she whispered, so soft it barely broke the air, "My dreams smell like ash." Elliot's throat tightened. He saw it again. The scar behind her ear, crescent-shaped, like the one Mara's baby had. He exhaled, a ragged sound of relief and burden. She wasn't just a stranger. She was his niece, Mara's daughter, stolen from the flames. The next morning, they rode through the skeletal remains of an old cottonwood grove, the trees charred and twisted like ghosts reaching for the sky. This was the Kane homestead, or what was left of it. Elliot hadn't returned in over a decade, couldn't bear to. But she needed to see it. She dismounted, moving slow, her fingers brushing a blackened stump like it was a gravestone. "This was home," Elliot said, his voice low. He pointed to a patch of scorched earth where the house once stood. "That's where your mother died, shielding you from the fire. That's why you lived." Her jaw tightened, and she knelt, scooping up a handful of dark soil, letting it sift through her fingers. "This place burned," she whispered. "But it smells like sage." Elliot froze. "Mara used to burn sage in the mornings," said it kept the spirits kind. The memory hit him like a bullet. "Your name was Clara," he said, the words spilling out. "Clara Kane." She turned to him, eyes trembling. Then, quiet as the dawn, she cried. Not loud, not broken, just tears falling like rain on dry earth, giving her back to herself piece by piece. The dawn broke over the New Mexico desert, painting the horizon in streaks of orange and gold. Elliot and Clara rode north from the ruins of the Kane homestead, the air thick with the scent of sage and memory. Clara wore her mother's old duster, the collar turned up to hide the star-shaped pendant, though its weight against her chest felt like a promise kept. Elliot rode ahead, his eyes scanning the endless stretch of scrub and mesa for trouble. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them was steady, like the rhythm of hoofbeats on hard earth. They stopped at midday by a shallow creek, letting the horses drink under the shade of a gnarled juniper. Elliot handed Clara a strip of dried beef, chewing his own slowly. "You ever been anywhere?" he asked, his voice rough from the dust. She shook her head. I remember a seller. A woman with gray eyes. She wasn't kind. Her fingers tightened around the pendant. Not my mother. She had a whip on the wall, said it was for runaways. Elliot's jaw clenched, but he kept his gaze on the creek, hiding the anger burning in his chest. You won't go back, he said simply. I know, Clara replied, her voice sharp as a blade's edge. I wouldn't let me. He smiled, just a flicker. She was young, but there was iron in her now, not just pain but something deeper, something Mara had carried, too. They mounted up and rode on until the sky bled red, the desert turning shadows into warnings. That's when Elliot spotted them, vultures circling high over a canyon's mouth, their dark wings cutting the fading light. Stay close, he told Clara, his hand drifting to the rifle slung across his saddle. What is it? She asked, squinting. Trouble. Or what's left of it. They dismounted at the canyon's edge and crept forward, crouched low in the brittle grass. Below, a wrecked wagon lay tilted, its axle snapped, crates spilled across the dirt. Blood stained the ground, and two bodies sprawled nearby, each with a bullet hole through the chest. One still gripped a rusty pistol. Scattered around were scraps of black cloth and iron manacles, glinting dully in the dusk. Slavers, Elliot muttered, his voice low. Not the legal kind. Clara's face paled. She recognized the cloth. It matched the rags she'd been given after the auction. We were cargo, she whispered. Just things to them. Elliot didn't look at her, didn't want her to see the storm in his eyes. He studied the tracks leading away, 4 horses headed north, the same direction they were going. Whoever killed these men wasn't after justice. They were after profit, clearing out rivals. Come on, he said, standing. We're not the only ones chasing ghosts. They rode until dark, camping beneath a sandstone overhang where the wind couldn't reach. Clara sharpened a stick with Elliot's knife, her movements precise, her face tight with thought. You think they're looking for me? She asked. Elliot cleaned his rifle, slow and deliberate. They're looking for money, he said. To them, you're still a dollar sign. She nodded, her fingers brushing the pendant. Then we make me invisible. He chuckled, a dry sound. You sound like her, he said, meaning Mara. She'd have said the same. No, Clara said, her voice fierce. She had her fire. This is mine. I just haven't earned it yet. That night they made a plan, not to hide, but to hunt. Elliot knew a man in Dust Creek, a former bounty hunter turned scribe, who kept records of every dirty deal in the territory. If anyone knew who sold Clara, where she'd been, it was him. And once they had a name, there'd be no more auctions, just answers and maybe blood. Clara tied her hair back, tucked the pendant inside her shirt, and looked at Elliot. You ready? She asked. He nodded, checking his revolver. Let's ride. The trail to Dust Creek was a ribbon of dust and secrets, winding through canyons where the sun barely touched the earth. Elliot and Clara rode steady, the New Mexico sky pressing down like a warning. Dust Creek wasn't a town you found on purpose, it was a place you ended up when the world had no use for you. Shacks leaned against each other like drunks, and the only thing taller than the saloon was the church steeple, weathered to a dull gray. They tied their horses behind a crumbling livery and walked toward the church, the only building that didn't seem ready to collapse. The town was too quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like eyes watching from every shadow. You sure he's here? Clara asked, her hand resting on the knife in her belt. He doesn't leave, Elliot said. Jasper Cole collects secrets like others collect bounties. The church door groaned as they pushed it open, the air inside thick with dust and the faint smell of old candle wax. Pews sat uneven, and sunlight sliced through cracked stained glass, casting jagged colors across the floor. At the front, a man stood over a table stacked with books and papers, muttering to himself. Jasper Cole was older than Elliot remembered. Hair white as bone, eyes sharp as a hawk's, his hands scarred from years of holding both guns and pens. Jasper, Elliot called, his voice echoing in the empty church. The old man didn't startle, just turned slow, squinting. Elliot Kane. Still dragging ghosts, I see. His gaze flicked to Clara, lingering on the faint outline of the star-shaped pendant under her shirt. And you brought one with you. We need your help, Elliot said, stepping forward. She was sold in Redstone. I need names, seller, buyer, anyone who touched her. Jasper's eyes narrowed, studying Clara like he was reading a map. Then he froze, his breath catching. "That pendant," he whispered. "Mara wore one just like it." "She's Mara's daughter," Elliot said. "Clara Kane." Jasper staggered back, like the name had hit him square in the chest. "She's alive?" "They said she burned with the homestead." "She didn't," Elliot said. "Someone made sure of that." Jasper pulled a heavy ledger from a crate, its leather cover scorched at the edges. He flipped through yellowed pages with trembling fingers, muttering under his breath. "They called her Star when she passed through," he said finally. "Quiet girl, bought by a woman named Lila Voss. Runs a house out of Black Mesa. Trades in girls, keeps them docile and broken." Clara flinched at the name, her voice low. "I remember her. Gray eyes, sharp as glass. She'd hum hymns before she hurt us." Elliot's hand tightened on his rifle. "Voss keep records?" Jasper nodded. "Detailed. Uses them to keep her patrons in line, judges, bankers, men with too much to lose. Her place is at Black Mesa, top of the ridge. White house, iron fence. She doesn't hide. Doesn't need to." They rode out that afternoon, but as they left Dust Creek, Clara glanced back, her eyes sharp. "3 riders," she said, voice low. "Half a mile back, keeping off the main trail." Elliot didn't turn. "Company," he muttered. "Someone's been talking." They pushed their horses hard, veering into a narrow canyon Elliot knew from his bounty hunting days. By dusk, they camped under a cluster of twisted pines, hidden from the trail. Clara stood watch, her knife glinting in the moonlight. "You think Lila sent them?" she asked. "Or someone who wants you back for her," Elliot said, loading his rifle. "Either way, they won't stop." Clara gripped her pendant, her voice steady. "Then neither will I." That night, she dreamed, not of sellers or whips, but of her mother, standing in a field of sage, smiling with arms wide. Behind her was a man with a rifle and eyes like hers. She woke with tears she didn't wipe away, not out of sorrow but because she'd found something worth keeping. Black Mesa loomed like a warning, its cliffs casting long shadows over a valley of dry grass and crooked pines. The trail to Lila Voss's house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that hid teeth. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of fire, Elliot and Clara crested the ridge. There it was, a white house with lace curtains, a porch swaying gently, and an iron fence that gleamed like a predator's smile. A single lantern glowed by the door, soft as a lie. Clara stared, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been here before. I remember perfume and piano music. Thought it meant safety." Elliot nodded grimly. "That's her game. Dresses up a cage to look like a home." He handed Clara the faded photograph of her mother, Mara, smiling in front of the old Kane homestead, baby Clara in her arms. "Keep it close," he said. She tucked it into her duster, her jaw tight. Elliot checked his rifle. "2 guards out back," he said, scanning the house. "More inside, likely. Maybe the kind you don't see until it's too late." "Do you think she remembers me?" Clara asked, her hand on the knife in her belt. Elliot met her eyes. "Lila Voss never forgets a girl she broke." They tethered the horses behind a weathered shed and moved on foot, slipping through the shadows to the side entrance. The door was unlocked, no guard too easy. Elliot hesitated, then pushed it open with his boot. Inside, the air was heavy with lavender and wax, the walls lined with portraits of young women, their faces blank like dolls. Clara stopped at one, her breath catching. "That's Sarah," she whispered. "She cried when they burned her books. Said it made her look too clever." Elliot's grip on his rifle tightened. At the end of the hall, a door opened and Lila Voss stepped out. She was older, her gray eyes sharp as flint, her dark dress too fine for the dust it stood on. Her smile was cold, like frost on a blade. "Well," she purred, "look who came back home." Clara stepped forward before Elliot could speak. "You sold me," she said, her voice flat as iron. "I saved you," Lila replied, her hand resting on a velvet chair. "You were nothing but ash and bones when I found you. No name, no past. I gave you silk, a bed. You gave me silence. You gave me chains," Clara said. Lila sighed, her smile thinning. "Gratitude is wasted on your kind." Elliot stepped beside Clara, rifle low but ready. "She's not yours anymore, Voss. She's Clara Kane, my blood. Say otherwise, and I'll carve the truth into your walls." The air went still. Then, boots thudded upstairs. heavy, deliberate. Lila's smile returned, sharp. You're not the only one who knows how to fight, Kane. Elliot turned to Clara. Get to the shed. Now. I'm not leaving you, she said, slipping a knife from her boot and pressing it into his hand. For later, she whispered, then slipped into the dark. A guard charged down the stairs, firing wild. Elliot dove behind a table, returning 2 quick shots. The man crumpled before he hit the floor. Another shouted from a doorway, but Elliot was already moving, flipping the table to block the shot, then charging with the rifle's butt. Wood cracked, blood spilled, and the second man fell. Lila screamed, not in pain but in fury. You're a fool, Kane. This house is protected. You'll swing for this. Elliot advanced, his voice steady. You sold children, Lila. The law won't hang me for cutting out rot. She backed up, her hand darting for a pistol hidden under a tablecloth. Elliot shot the lamp beside her, glass shattering. She froze. I don't want to kill you, he said, his voice shaking with restraint. Not because you don't deserve it, but because Mara raised me better. Outside, Clara ran for the shed, a third gunman on her heels. He fired, bullets kicking up dust, but she knew this ground now. She ducked behind a crate, aimed the pistol she'd taken from the canyon fight, and fired once, clean through his leg. He screamed, collapsing. She stepped over him. You touched me once, she said, voice low. You don't get another chance. Elliot tied Lila to the porch rail with her own silk cords, the kind she'd used to bind girls for sale. Clara stood beside him, the wind tugging at her hair, moonlight catching her pendant. You want to end it? Elliot asked. Clara looked at Lila, the woman who'd fed her lies wrapped in hymns, and shook her head. She doesn't get to take up more space in me. Elliot nodded, struck a match, and tossed it through the open door. Flames licked up the curtains as they rode away, Lila's screams fading into the night. The house burned, smoke curling into the sky like a confession. They camped on a bluff overlooking the valley, the fire's glow a distant wound. Clara pulled out the photograph of her mother and laid it beside her. Think she'd be proud? She asked. She would, Elliot said. You didn't become them. You survived, then you fought. Clara lay back, staring at the stars. Are we done? Elliot looked out over the desert, where 100 more girls like her still waited for justice. No, he said. We're just getting started. Months later, the Ledger's names became headlines. From Redstone to Dust Creek, Black Mesa to Silver Flats, men fell, judges, bankers, sheriff. They called it the Star Reckoning. In Dust Creek, they tore down the auction block and built a school. In Black Mesa, grass grew over the ashes. Clara stayed with Elliot long enough to heal, then started her own path, teaching girls to read, ride, and stand tall. She didn't wear the pendant anymore, she carried it in her blood. Years later, Elliot rode into Dust Creek, his hair gray, his eyes still sharp. Clara met him on the school's porch. You got taller, he said. You got slower, she smirked, then handed him a folded note. Another name, another girl. He turned to go, but she stopped him. Stay a night. I don't sleep much, he admitted. Then we'll watch the stars, she said. They sat together, 2 survivors who should have been ghosts but weren't. The wind carried a new sound, not anger but promise. Because when the dust settles, it's the ones who walk through fire who write the story that comes next.